Welcome to today's Hospice News webinar, where we'll be discussing the hospice and palliative care community's outlook for 2024. I'd like to start by thanking our sponsor, CareXM. My name is Jim Parker. I'm editor of Hospice News, which is a WTWH media publication. And today we'll be talking with hospice leaders about how they'll be navigating the challenges that are emerging in the new year, as well as capitalize on the opportunities. Before I introduce our speakers, I'd like to cover just a few housekeeping items. First, participant lines have been muted for sound quality. Also, the webinar is being recorded and will be sent to participants following the presentation. We also welcome audience questions during the presentation, so please feel free to submit questions using the designated box. I'm now pleased to introduce our speakers. With us today is Andrew Molosky, the CEO of Florida-based Chapters Health. Also with us is C. Lu, CEO of CareXM, and Craig Dresang, CEO of YoloCares, who is also a voting member of the California Hospice Network. Thank you all very much for being here. We really appreciate it. So I wanted to start just kind of generally, what's top of mind for you as you look ahead to 2024? Craig, would you like to start?
Sure. Well, our entire industry is really in a metamorphosis. And what's top of mind for me is further clarifying how we morph into something more than just a hospice organization that has other programs. Survivability and relevance in the future of this segment of healthcare really demands that we become a different organization that happens to have hospice in our portfolio of service and care programs. And so we've been in this metamorphosis for the last, I would say, 10 years, and we're just continuing that.
Excellent. And Andrew, would you go next?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Jim. So, not unlike Craig, I have a feeling that today many of us are going to say, in addition to what he said, right, I think there's a lot of commonality in our approaches. One of the things that the organization that if you hung around me for any length of time, you'd know that I'm very much a long range or try to be a long range thinker. So when you get a question about what does this year hold, it's always in the context of on the journey to X, to Y by when. And so 2024 really is a bite out of the apple that we look at as the next 4 to 5 year plan. Does include some of the pieces that Craig mentioned, but certainly not exclusive to them. And when you do that, then you say, okay, the law of diminishing returns states too many things gets you nothing, right? And so to that end, we'll be focusing very much on continued growth, on continued enhancement of our culture around patient care driven by exceptional employee care, and then ultimately operational efficiency, which creates the subsidies and or the bottom line to reinvest in that becoming something new that Craig spoke of. So, there's a journey you're on with a defined time frame. And then there's the bites of the apple you take along the way. Those are the 3 bites that we intend on really sinking our teeth into in 24.
Thank you. And C, how would you answer that question?
Yeah, thank you, Jim. And I resonate very strongly with Craig's word about metamorphosis and sort of Andrew's talk about really looking at our long-range plan. For all of our hospice customers, we're looking at how to support those metamorphosis needs, looking in the long-term future adjustment, including things on how to become a value-based care delivery organization, specifically on 2 rather tactical areas to start, but has huge ramification in terms of data they can generate. First is how to automate some of the ongoing under-automated processes to get more efficiency out of the hospice organization's operation. Second is specifically as they look at how to change into organizations who have more than hospice in nature, how to get the optimal allocation of nursing labor by looking to more areas of potential centralization. So thinking workload distribution and having the data to support them, what's consumed on intake, on visits, on triage, and even patient engagement and coordination. I think we're all beginning to recognize that sometimes we overload our nurses on all things. There's definitely an opportunity to sort the queue better as they think about their operations differently.
Thank you. And Andrew, I think we'll start with you next. And that is, where do you see the greatest growth opportunities this year in terms of referrals?
Yeah, and that's an exceptional question that could be answered, I guess, relative to what your organization views as an opportunity, right? So when I offer this, I would tell you it's in context to the fact that Chapters Health is a very firm believer, in fact, this point of really refitting its entire organizational MO to be that of a value-based design organization. Now, you'll notice I specifically steered away from words like capitated or subdelegated risk or owning the payer or not, because the mindset of value-based is very different than the mindset of capitation and or premium management. And we'll get into that at some point. But when we talk about great growth opportunities, I'm not going to speak to that by segment. I'm not going to say I expect nursing homes to go up by 8% and assisted living to go down by 4%. Those are sub-elements or lag measures. I'm a firm believer that as we look at growth opportunities, it is what is not tapped today or what becomes prevalent today that is not, or tomorrow that is not prevalent today. And I would tell you my singular belief and representative of the organization is this is where you're going to be able to get to other entities in the value-based space. Primary care groups taking full delegated risk from a payer. ACOs who have said now we're looking at total cost of care as a viable option for us. And when they do that, inevitably there'll be some hiccups if they see hospice as a cost center. But when they come to really be educated, as a sales cycle would do, they're going to realize that what we're going to do is enable their cost savings, total cost of care metrics, MLR ratios, things of that nature, as opposed to being beholden to it. So we're putting an intense focus on, that value-based group of folks. And there's a wide audience to whom that applies, but it's going to be very different than the traditional transactional showing up and trying to earn a referral and subsequently earn another referral. And that's kind of our view on 2024 and beyond.
Thank you. And C, what are you seeing happening?
Yeah, and I think on this subject, we're absolutely learning a lot from folks like Andrew and some of his peers in the industry who's rethinking how to become a value-based care delivery organization in the broadest sense. Subjects such as strategic payer relationship, further health system partnership, but all of that, no matter which segment of the continuum you start with, it seemed to reside on focus on quality, specifically the proven ability to prevent complications that can result in higher cost utilization, so that we can turn hospice from a cost center into some of the value delivery center as well. And those are very interesting subjects that are coming up across the healthcare organizations that we deal with so far.
Excellent. And Craig, what do you see as the biggest opportunity related to referral growth?
Well, I think this is a really exciting time for our industry. And, here in California, we have, I think it's 1,300 hospice providers. I would wager to bet that, by 2030, because some folks, we believe that Medicare wants to get out of the hospice business by 2030. That is a fundamental shift in how our organizations have been supported historically. So I wonder how many of those organizations are really preparing for and thinking about that shift and what it will mean for their organizations. So the idea of expanding our service lines beyond just palliative care, here in California, Medi-Cal, which is our version of Medicaid, is expanding to include supportive and transitional care, health navigation for people with chronic and serious illness. And there will be a mechanism for payment for providers who are going into that space. So for us, right now, our palliative care program is actually bigger than our hospice program. We recently opened an adult daycare program and a center for caregiver support. So I anticipate these programs to grow in the future and have greater revenue generation than they do right now in anticipation of these shifts. Now, all of that said, the idea of financial sustainability, we can't lose the spirit of where we came from as community-based organizations. We're by design here as a safety net for our community to be linked to our communities and to deliver on high quality care. So, I believe that high quality equals sustainability. It's going to be key in the future. It's already important to have contracts with payers who are concerned about quality, but they want quality at the best price possible. So every year, and especially this year, we are in a metamorphosis trying to get closer and closer to that mark.
Excellent. And do have a follow-up question from our audience on that one. And could you, Craig, just expand a little bit on the statement Medicare wants to be out of the hospice business by 2030? Just kind of say a little bit more about that.
Sure. So already I think it's half of all of the hospice beneficiaries have Medicare Advantage. Medicare Advantage is rapidly facilitating this change. So that means that payment structures are going to change. And we're going to have network restrictions. So in order to provide care for the segment of patients who we historically have, we're going to have contracts with the new payers to deliver on both quality and cost.
Excellent, thank you. And so consolidation, of course, has been pretty rampant the last 5 years or so in hospice. There was a bit of a slump last year. Some observers expect it to pick up again in 2024, at least to some extent. Wondered what you see as the outlook for mergers and acquisitions in 2024. Andrew, would you kick this one off?
Sure, yeah. And if it's okay, I'm going to weave a little bit of the last element into the prelude, if you will, to the mergers and acquisitions or grander affiliation conversations. And so to Craig's point, again, second time today, everything you said is accurate. And, if you look at that, that gives us what? Till 2030 is 2,167 days, unless I missed a leap year in there somewhere. Medicare getting out of hospice is a subcomponent of, I believe personally, to be their larger motivation. And I don't think it's targeted to hospice. A lot of folks, when they hear this dialogue, think if we lobby hard enough, we'll change their minds on hospice, whether that's the MA penetration globally, it's the evolution of the benefit, the regulatory, whatever. I think the larger concern we need to have is the government is trying to get out of singular service administration in general, right? They have pushed ambulatory surgical into bundled payments. They have pushed nursing home and the total cost of care. They have pushed, and the list goes on. So I think when we singularly say they're trying to get out of hospice, what can we do about that? That's a faulty notion. I think we have to realize if they've set 2030 as a target date, what they're setting is not a pro or an anti-hospice conversation. They're setting an accountability to total cost of care models conversation. Therefore, the merger and acquisitions outlook is extremely relevant. And of course, then it is a beholden item to, what are the defined ambitions of your organization, right? And this is going to be as widely variable as the audience listening to this today. If you're one of our equity firm partners, portfolio organizations looking for that macro level roll up, 24 might hold some headwinds for you, right? We've got regulatory pressures, market economy that's really difficult from a lending and capital perspective. But if you're if you're an organization that's looking for a partner or maybe an entity to entity endeavor, certainly looks very different. There's always quality organizations. Craig made a great point. If you're a safety net organization viewing other safety nets as an economy of scale dialogue, it could be a very fruitful year. So I guess the M&A outlook depends on two things, in my humble opinion. One, what is your defined organizational ambition? Two, how does the current landscape of tough lending, conditions, rapidly growing market competition, and then of course the outside headwinds when it comes to M&A approvals and antitrust statements, and then of course further vetting of compliance natures. And so I don't want to call it ambiguous, it's the wrong word. It's opportunistic if you're clear about your ambition and the mechanisms you have at your disposal to see those through.
Thank you. And Craig, how would you answer that question?
I completely agree with Andrew. I will say though, I came from an organization in Chicago where I helped facilitate a merger between three of the legacy nonprofit organizations. As a result, they became the largest hospice and palliative care provider in the state, and they don't exist anymore. 15-ish years ago, one of the premier providers in the country, which was both in terms of quality and size, Hospice of San Diego, has disappeared. So the idea of getting large and merging and looking at acquisitions is not the silver bullet for our organizations. I think it's important. We've seen a lot of it here this year in California. Actually, in the last 6 months, we have this loose affiliation group called the Nonprofit Hospice Coalition of California, and 4 of our members have merged with larger entities. A couple of those much larger entities that have an average daily census of 3,000 patients, they're suffering losses every single year. So it's not just about getting bigger. It's really about figuring out how to stay true to that founding spirit, to be connected to your communities and deliver on quality and relevance.
And C, what do you see happening on the M&A front?
Yeah, and I think on a macro forces level, I really don't think there's a better way to describe it other than exactly what Andrew said. In fact, I was furiously taking notes. I think that's one of the most articulate way to express the macro buckets. And in terms of our, so I'll attempt to connect the dots with our conversation with some of our most competitive customer, I would say, that are thinking about the future, that actually are with their feet on the ground to do what exactly Craig was mentioning. M&A may not be the silver bullet, since it always comes with complication, different capital constraint depending on the life cycle of the organization. But they're more broadly thinking about, and I would describe their mindset as long-term optimistic, and I would even describe midterm paranoid. Midterm paranoid is about all the changes they would need in order to get their organization into this value-based care delivery solution that is at all possible. And then long-term optimistic, because I believe all of us on this call and in the attendee audience believe fundamentally in the value of hospice and end-of-life care in general. So what they're practically thinking about is how to become more network-like. Maybe it's not entirely an ownership change. Maybe it's a better and further strategic partnership in different endpoints of the continuum. Lots of consideration around palliative care and how to turn that from a cost constraint into more of a competitive advantage. Lots of discussion about how to provide more technology and understanding into the total cost of care so that they can really demonstrate with these sort of medium-term paranoid changes to the forces that Andrew described to be better equipped for the future. So I think it won't be pure M&A, but more so how to pursue different avenues to become more network-like, if you will.
And I think as we get into this next segment, some of our listeners will probably lean in a little closer to their computers, because it's a big one. And that's, how are hospices navigating the regulatory changes that are being implemented this year? Craig, I think maybe we'll start with you. I know California in particular has undergone a lot of, of course not your organization, but a lot of scrutiny, a lot of regulatory activity there that kind of spurred some national movement. So, how would you say hospices are navigating these changes?
Wow. So this is a big question, and it's a little challenging to answer, because I typically don't like to emphasize a difference in hospice providers regarding their tax status. However, I can tell you that in the nonprofit world, we have been long focused on compliance issues and making sure that our practices and our care and our philosophy is aligned with what the federal and state governments are telling us we should do. At the same time, organizations that want to get super close to that line or skirt around the edges of regulations and some of the what are considered scrupulous practices, I think it's only going to get worse. And it'll be interesting in 5 years to see how many hospice providers we have left in California, because I think the combination of sort of the regulatory environment, the shifting regulatory environment, and the need for value-based care is going to shake a lot of players out. And I'm not sure they're all ready for it. This is a big topic. I'd be really interested to hear what Andrew has to say on this as well. I'll tell you, though, it's frustrating because, every hospice I talk to, they've, been under the scrutiny lens and have undergone numerous audits from Medicare. it kills us when we have to pay back hundreds of thousands of dollars following an audit from Medicare for patients who were 97 years old. And by the time the audit rolls around, the patients have already died. But the regulators are saying that, the patients were not, our documentation was not reflective of the patients having to stay on hospice care. So, I think that's shifting too, but hospice organizations have to budget for those storms as they roll in.
And C, what are you hearing from your clients about the regulatory environment?
Yeah, from CareXM's vantage point, I think most of our conversation with hospice clients are around the updates to the hospice quality reporting program that include the data completion threshold policies. And by examining the key workflows that could help them impact very practical matters such as HVLDL, hospice care index, and CAPS in general, where triage and care coordination as two central functions played a rather significant role in preventing delays in care and accelerating the closed loop effect from the first request or detection of a patient's need to the actual delivery or resolution of the underlying need. When you think about it, those are all moments of interaction or touch points with the patient, as those inputs on labor, on quality, and patient experience start to feed to that medium to long-term impact as some of the macro subject that we talked about in the previous question. That's some of the most progressive organizations are really starting to focus on. And of course, as we work on those aspect of it, we hear no shortage of the gripes about these delayed in data sets that as Craig can begin to talk about. That's really rather friction prone, and really want to look for more near real-time way to really thinking about quality and total cost of care as well.
And Andrew, what's your perspective on the regulatory space right now?
Yeah, and thank you. I'm going to steal from my teammates here and try to layer in something perhaps new, but I, as an underpinning, completely agree, right? So I tend to speak in a little bit of parable, so forgive me for the bad analogies I'll draw. But there's an old adage, right? History is written by those who won. And I think we in the hospice space do a poor job of looking at those who have come before us and dealt with this. If you've got a home health background, you know what it was like when the federal government really put the screws down. If you have a nursing home background, you know the same thing. Yet I fail to hear enough of our peers saying, what did they do? What can we learn from? So when it comes to the topic of compliance or regulation or regulatory adaptation, my comment would be the same. One, we have a blueprint to follow. We do a poor job of following it. Two, you can't think of it as an adaptation you do once, right? It's not a static issue. It's a living, dynamic, constantly evolving thing. And if you have an organization that views compliance and regulatory adaptation as an underpinning of who they are, you're going to have an easier time taking kind of constant hits, if you will. And so I liked Craig's comment. If you live in California or Florida or any place that's subject to natural disasters, a storm approaching conjures up a very different image. And I would kind of dwell on that for a minute. So think and use analogy here. Do you roll the dice and uninsure your home on the notion that nothing bad will ever happen to you and then complain when it does? No. You buy insurance policies, and they're expensive and they're annoying, and it's just part of the cost of being a homeowner. This is no different, right? You build a regulatory team that is, yes, expensive, requires investment. Two, needs the time and the effort, even though it's not, sexy or flashy or has teeth. It does the day the storm shows up. And I think that that's what an organization that's going to navigate regulatory change does well, is never falls behind, realizes it's the cost of doing business, and views it as a living, dynamic part of their culture and not a burden they have to live with. So a lot of semantics, a lot of hyperbole there, but I think the reality is more is going to come. The government will use, again, the second old adage, they will use a cannon to kill a mosquito. They are going to put overly burdensome, highly costly surveys and audits in place with the intention of driving out either A, the undercapitalized, or B, the bad players. And if they happen to snag and burden a couple of us doing the right things the right way in the middle, sorry, Charlie, right? So I think what you have to do is realize that's the mechanism they've chose. We can cry about it all day. It's not going to change anything. That said, we do have some very great organizations out there representing us. Choose the ones: NHPCO, NOC, NPHI, whatever your team is. We need to empower them with the quality data, with the real metrics, to go to these governmental entities, state or federal, and say, here's why you need to change your approach, not be less regulatory, but be more effective, right? You don't have to swat everything with, what they say, when you have a nail, everything looks like a hammer. There's a different way. So that's a whole bunch of stuff thrown in there, but I do think we can get through this, if you follow some part of that.
And I would just
Thank
add
you.
something we started a couple of years ago here is identifying, naming the areas where we thought we could be vulnerable in terms of compliance or some of the regulatory shifts, but they're all related to quality. So we put pen to paper, we named those things, and then really had our education department focus on partnering with the clinical side of the house to drive that quality. But what really helps drive it, and again, there will always be some things that slip through the cracks, but in terms of meeting the needs of the regulatory environment and compliance, we have a performance pay system that rewards clinicians on every paycheck for meeting certain standards that we've set up or created that keep us in a safe zone for compliance and quality. And it has moved the needle. And I think we have to look at creative ways to drive this in our organizations. And there's no easier way for the frontline clinicians than rewarding them with additional pay if they're meeting quality and compliance standards.
Really interesting point. And I do have a follow-up from our audience that it was a great point to look towards healthcare peers and how to adapt. What resources would you recommend hospices use to understand how home health, SNFs, et cetera, adapted to similar changes? And if you'll forgive a shameless plug, Hospice News did do a few articles on that last year. I think we did 3, looking at the home health experience and what hospices can kind of learn from what they went through. But Andrew, you made that comment. Would you like to start? What are some resources that hospices could look to learn more?
Yeah, I mean, certainly this is how do you eat an elephant, right? One bite at a time. I think you have to rely upon publications and articles like Hospice News. I think there are certainly great trade associations to learn from. I think there's certainly conferences and environments that focus on this very subject. But even more brass tacks, assuming you don't have an airport near you, you don't have the budget to travel, or you don't have access to the internet, there are one of those other entities in your hometown. I promise you this, there's not a caller on this webinar today who doesn't have a home health or a nursing home or a hospital in their community and a compliance department that goes with that. It's very simple on some occasions. Ask them, enlist them, put them on your governance board and your advisory boards, get them involved in co-presentations, try to work on writing some sort of publication, take them out to coffee, right? I think we have a bad habit in this line of work, in all line of work, but specifically this one, of thinking that we're alone or unique. Sometimes it is just as simple as asking someone, can I have 10 minutes of your time, whether they're consulting for a fee, whether they're employed, they're on a board, or they're just somebody that doesn't want to see the safety net hospice provider that they've known and loved in their community go down in flames. They will help you.
That makes sense. Are there any other resources out there that you'd recommend? C, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, my comment might be slightly biased by majority of my experience working for health systems side of the equation. I think IHI, Institute for Healthcare Improvement, is a very interesting body to follow as far as sort of following the blueprint that Andrew had mentioned early on different sort of quality program. I think one of the sort of fairly recent body of work around the age-friendly health system might provide some inspiration about the different relevance into the sort of value-based future and post-acute as we collectively look at it.
Excellent. And Craig, what other resources would you recommend?
Yeah, well, I really agree with Andrew's comment about partnering and collaborating with people who have the expertise, organizations who have the expertise in our service territories. Getting them on your board is a great idea. Having them participate on your QAPI committee, using that expertise and figuring out how to incorporate. If we stay focused on the expertise that we have in-house, we're going to be limited and we're going to be vulnerable. So, in our organization, it's sort of in our DNA to be collaborators and partners and bring in others, to help us champion some of this, so we're prepared now and in the future. We historically have brought in the chief medical officer from Sutter Health, who was responsible for quality and compliance for the surgeons in the health system, to help us on our board and on our QAPI committee sort of chart out the future of where we need to focus. So I think it really is about letting go of institutional ego, knowing that we don't have all the answers, and figuring out how to bring in others who can help us.
And I think the comments on the trade organizations was also kind of important. I know when we reported on those articles, those were really our sources. There were others, but NHPCO, NOC, NPHI, Leading Age. Those are really the people we went to ask those questions, along with some providers. So I think they can be a resource as well. What further new regulatory actions would you anticipate for 2024? Andrew, would you start?
Oh, so my question is, can I predict what the government's going to do next? That sounds like a really fun Friday conversation. I think the easiest way to answer this is, and I have, for those of you who know me, I tend to draw a lot of child analogies, having a teenager in the house. This to me is a whole lot like when you do a math equation, right? You hope that you can make all the variables balance, but you don't quite know when one moves, what the other is going to happen to it as a result. So hopefully this looks a little more like algebra than it does, say, calculus or linear geometry. But you got to look at the macro landscape to shape the 8 ball and see where this goes. I think we have a continued prevalence of Medicare Advantage. So you're going to see things that look a little bit more like network sufficiency oversight. And you're going to look at total cost of care, and you're going to look at claims that should or shouldn't be billed or associated to whatever benefit, who's administering it. I think you're going to see the increased prevalence. Now, whether they adhere to it or not, it's a different question. Jim, you had a great highlighted piece not too long ago about there's a moratorium in California, but CMS keeps approving them, right? And so, I think there's going to be some state level and federal level interventions to control the market itself. I think you've got certificate of need states that are going through their own battles as to what regulation looks like and oversight looks like. Of course, you're going to have, as long as CMS continues to use these third-party organizations who are motivated by collections as a percentage of the audits they conduct, that is not a system that is built to go away. That's a system that's built to do more, right? And so I think when you look at the forces at play, I suspect more is to come. The question will be, what is the blend or balance? And I did cheat. I saw a question in the chat box that says, even when you're a quality hospice, what do you do with these unprecedented audits? I think that's a dovetail to what we're talking about, right? I would tell you this about the 10th analogy I've used. They always say the tallest blade of grass gets cut first, right? So I think as an organization, I don't know that we can change the regulatory, deluge, but I think you can statistically and very purposefully build an organization that is highly diverse in its patient population and its diagnostic codes and its billing claims and its ability to say, we are not an outlier for GIP or continuous care or long length of stay. We are not an outlier for rapid growth in a year or divested 6 times in 6 months. I think you have to understand that when you do that, you are in essence sticking yourself out further on a bell curve, and these systems are all built to tackle the variable ends of a bell curve. And so, I think the answer is, I don't know if we can stop it, but I do think there are concerted tactics like managing your business to certain metrics, setting a specific strategic plan in play to get what you ambition for, and not being a victim or a buoy in the ocean of how the regulatory headwinds are going to change, but to chart a course that kind of plows through. Pardon the boat analogy. I'm from Florida.
Thank you. And Craig, what would you anticipate for this year?
Wow. I mean, that's a really big question, and it's hard to anticipate. It's hard to anticipate what the government's going to do. Our internal QAPI team is constantly looking at areas of risk for our organization. And I think that it's prudent for like-minded hospice and end-of-life care providers to do an internal dive and reflect on those areas where they're most vulnerable, and then to put some plans together for how you're going to address that. It's it's always changing. It's expensive to address. It takes a lot of time, but it's really necessary. And you know what? At the end of the day, all of the preparation and all of the anticipation could possibly miss the mark for the changes that are we don't even know about that could be rolled out. But we have to keep focused on that and trying. We've historically tried to bring leaders in the region who have expertise in these areas to help us with the regulatory environment and compliance onto our board and onto our QAPI committee. And I think that if you have the capacity to do that as an organization, it will serve you well, because those outside perspectives are really valuable.
Thank you. And C, what would you expect?
Yeah, and I think our impression from CareXM's vantage point is very similar to what Craig was mentioning. Our impression, it's better to anticipate the necessity to operate in a value-based future with all the data collection that's now required by CMS and will only continue to increase in terms of the surface area. We go even further by reminding our partner organization to say, a lot of times when we've seen this in the health system world, you might invest in an internal team that strictly focus on the quality data, or rather the output of the quality, but the ability to have a level of workflow analysis capable that can connect the endpoints of the quality data to the day-to-day workflow or the surface of interaction with your patients. Every moment of interaction, how does that lead downstream to a quality score of some kind that will come downstream, months, weeks, or even years later towards that? That is a relatively new discipline we see in post-acute, and we really see a lot of the stronger organizations start to invest heavily into that.
Excellent. And moving on a little bit from regulation, our next question is also come up in some of our audience questions as well, and that's where is the industry right now in terms of the staffing shortages? Have matters improved, worsened, or pretty much remained the same? Craig, would you start?
Yeah, they're always challenging in California. I would venture to guess that maybe more challenging here than anywhere else in the country. Nursing salaries here are super high. The market is very competitive. But again, going back to this idea of collaborating and partnership, we recruited the chair of the School of Nursing from Sacramento State and another notable tenured nursing professor onto our board to help think about how we can be more competitive in recruiting nurses and staff in the future. So partnerships with academic institutions, if you have them in your communities, we're fortunate here. We have UC Davis, Sacramento State, a number of other nursing colleges. Outreach to them and figuring out how to incorporate them into the fabric of your organization is really important. In fact, I'll do a shameless plug. We have an annual summit we do called the Quintessential Care Summit at Sacramento State. They gift us the campus for the use of this summit, and we have national figures coming in. It's March 15th, and Carrie Cooley from Weatherby, for instance, is one of the presenters. I think her topic is you don't want a hospice that's a fat baby, meaning well, that'll just be a teaser for her session. But she's going to talk about how organizations can really avoid some of the pitfalls that could pose huge challenges for them from a regulatory and compliance perspective. And so, none of that would be possible without partnering with others in our community and using their expertise.
And see, what are you seeing on the staffing front?
Yeah, and I think this is probably our most favorite subject at CareXM. I think while the labor market may appear to be slightly better overall comparing to, say, the height of the inflation curve, I think shortages are always on people's mind. That's why we think almost all of our customers are even looking at sort of tech-enabled services to get more leverage out of their labor investments, such that each unit of input can really deliver multiple units of output and really look at efficiently allocating their labor costs in the appropriate places, especially in California, as Greg mentioned, where the per unit costs just continue to rise so high.
And Andrew, please.
Yeah, so the challenge in going third is to find a viewpoint that's complementary, but also, provocative enough to justify the audience hearing. So I'm going to try that approach here, and it's not to disagree with anything my peers have said because they're absolutely correct. But I would challenge this, and those of you, especially if you're listening from our organization or know us, you'll know this is language I use every day. Staffing shortages, with air quotes, is a macro level problem. In the nation, we do not have enough of X to serve Y. But in your organization, your N, or the problem you're missing, your open roles, is a micro level problem. So while yes, I think there's definitely a shortage issue globally speaking, don't solve a macro level problem. No one has asked you to fix the staffing problem in the United States. Someone has asked you to fix the staffing problem in your company. Manage to the end that you're responsible for. And I absolutely, unwaveringly, and unapologetically am a culture freak. Now, I didn't say I was good at it, but I said I'm obsessive about it. And I absolutely believe that if you invest and you show up for one reason every day, and that is to take care of your employees, your N or your micro problem is going to be a lot smaller than anybody else's, right? I'm not going to take care of a single patient today. My team is. I'm the expendable one, not them. And I would tell you whether you call it an inverse pyramid, whether you call it a servant leadership mindset, whatever you want to call it, get as academic as you like. The companies who show up for their employees and not the other way around have a much smaller staffing problem than anybody else. You're operationally efficient, you have more money to pay them. Your turnover is less, you have to reinvest less frequently. You have better care outcomes, you can demand a higher margin or higher rate to reinvest in that staff. So, don't take it as just kind of soapboxy, pick up an airport management book. There's a very practical application to, if you make your employee your number one priority, the staffing shortage or the N is a micro problem that's way less issue for us than it is our others in the organization, other peers in the healthcare ecosystem.
I am so glad, Andrew, you said you're a culture freak. I'm a culture freak too. And I was sitting here thinking culture is everything. That is at the local level how we address staffing shortages. Beyond that, we've had to look at other creative ways to have incentive compensation for employees, paying bonuses in addition to competitive hourly salaries, company cars that are offered to clinical staff who do a lot of driving, covering 100% of their health insurance. All of that's important, but at the end of the day, it really is about organizational culture.
And of course, the COVID public health emergency has ended, but the illness is still with us. And, and had the pandemic had such a dramatic effect on healthcare and, of course, the nation. Are hospices still experiencing lingering effects from the pandemic from a business or clinical perspective? Andrew, would you start?
I guess when you're on a roll, you keep going. So if I was mildly antagonistic before, I'm going all in on this one. So, again, leadership. The definition of leadership is not focusing on a rear view mirror, it's focusing on the windshield. And so here's what I would tell you. The acknowledgement the pandemic is real. We all lived through it. I still have boxes stacked up in my office from when it was going on. But I would also call out one fact that I think as a leader, we have to be prescient or cognizant of. That was 4 years ago in March of 2020, right? Almost 4 years. Since then, how many of us on this call or elsewhere have gone through major natural disasters, huge legislative changes into our landscape, market conditions, you've been acquired or acquired someone else, right? At some point in time, when you can say, since then, I know people who have had a child, had it learn to walk and talk. I know people who've gone on military deployments and gotten college educations in that 4-year window. At some point, you have to say it's a thing in our past that was formative of us, but not define us. So I don't even truthfully tend to acknowledge pandemic conversations anymore, not because they didn't happen, but because I think it's all about what did we do with that information, and not are we going to allow it to be our Achilles heel forever. The longer you dwell on something, the longer you keep it alive. And so, yes, those things happened, but what we don't talk about in the same dialogue is it brought the highest market conditions of all time financially. It brought huge shifts in employee culture and working from home, which represents an opportunistic thing for when you're a community-based healthcare delivery system. There's a ton of good that needs to accompany the bad when you talk about the pandemic, and I'm a firm believer in that was an opportunity and not a problem for us.
And C, what's your perspective on this?
Yeah, that would strongly resonate with what Andrew said, because I think the best organizations are utterly transformed by COVID instead of marred by COVID. What COVID during those moments, I think many of us still remember the level of focus, resiliency, innovation that when we're all constrained, each and every organization, doesn't matter provider side, solution vendor side, come up with has sort of a really pressed our imagination or capacity overall with all these innovative models that are now available to be considered and some unforeseen advantages to be tapped into. We think that the lessons learned from COVID should be serving as more of a transformational point versus the MAR point. And with leaders like the folks on the call here with an acute focus to culture, leadership, retention, staff experience management side of it, I think COVID provided a lot of avenues of rapid experimentation to allow us to know how to do those things well.
Excellent. And Craig, please.
Yeah, I would say, COVID was sort of like the Black Plague, and what happened after the Black Plague was the Great Renaissance. And I think that's definitely true in our industry. It forced us to think differently about how to deliver care, for sure, how to incorporate telemedicine. It's funny because we had, long before COVID, we had purchased a bunch of Zoom licenses to incorporate telemedicine, and our staff, we just could not move the needle. And this was really related to our palliative care program. They weren't comfortable with it. It seemed so foreign. And then COVID comes along, and all of a sudden we make this major shift with not a lot of effort. And now it's just been incorporated into our model of care for palliative medicine. So there were a lot of good changes that emerged out of COVID that are going to serve us well into the future. So as challenging as it was, I think the residue is largely positive. It's thickened our skin, made us a little more scrappy, and given us new ideas about how we can care for our patients and families.
And what would you say are the biggest lessons learned during 2022 and 2023 that will inform hospice's strategies for 2024? C, would you begin?
Yeah, we've learned in partnering with our customer organization that come out of COVID, transform their operation as they think about a value-based future. We learned the critical role triage and coordination play in hospice organizations, even, especially for those with multi-location, as census reaching even above 1,000. I think these two care delivery area where most patient interaction or day-to-day touch points are being made are thinking about how to get more efficiencies out of their key processes, identifying optimization area of nursing labor allocation so that the right skills can be focused on the right jobs, so to speak, and invest in the layer of technology that's actually embedded into their culture, embedded into their experiences that can connect those two needs at becoming more of a foundational building block towards a value-based future.
And Craig, how would you answer that question?
I would say that it's been the realization that good communication is directly linked to good care. And coming out of COVID in 2022 and then moving into 2023, because staff were not as present in the office, because visits oftentimes look different, especially on the palliative care side of the house. For patients, they weren't always in person, that it really caused us as an organization to focus on effective communication, both with each other and with our patients and families. So now, it's part of our mantra that good care is directly linked to good communication, and it's a real focus for our organization.
Excellent, thank you. And Andrew, biggest lessons learned?
Yeah, it's equal, in my opinion, it's equal parts lessons learned as perceptions validated, right? For those of us who have chosen this career path and been on it for some time, what did we always clamor for? We can do more in the home than we're given credit. We bring a larger value to the healthcare ecosystem than people recognize. Our capabilities far exceed our compensatory or revenue reimbursements. And during COVID and/or 22 and 23, where all the trends were be in the home, be low cost, be interdisciplinary, be holistic and team thinking, oh boy, wouldn't it be great if there was an organization who didn't have to reinvent themselves to do that, right? So the fact that the outside world, or the Venn diagram of what we are combined with where they want us to be, finally overlaps. Everyone else is retrofitting their business to be value-based, to be home and community delivered, to be consumer-focused, and to be employee-friendly. We, if you've done a good job as an organization, should have only put the gas further down to the floor. There was no reverse. There was no pause to park to check the engine. It should have been gas all the way. So I think 2022, 2023 was, if properly, digested, it was an opportunity to really put on full display who we are and what we are as an industry, a system, a company, a brand, whatever. And then secondarily use that as the launch for becoming something bigger and better. And yet again, being 10 years ahead of the curve, like everybody else has historically waited until they had to have it thrust upon them. So again, I am a beholder. Certainly 2022 was not all roses. 2023 was not either. But, lemons and lemonade, right? I think this is a great chance for what we do to be on full display if you are willing to stand up and say, I'm prepared and I've read my lines.
Excellent. That makes a lot of sense. I'd like to pivot to an audience question next, and that is, how would you advise new hospice providers, to stay afloat? Craig, what advice would you give?
Focus on quality. Everything is really about quality. Quality will drive census. And what is it about your care and your support for families that sets you apart? Are there things you can point to? Are they quality scores? Or that you have a continuum of care that's something more than just hospice? We've had to morph into creating a center for loss and support that's bigger than just your typical bereavement program, having a center for caregiver support, having an adult day program, really going all in on palliative care. That has allowed us now to move into an entirely new space that the state of California is creating for supportive and transitional care, where there will be reimbursements for that. They're calling it something different, but to us, it just is really another form of palliative care that we've been doing all along. So I think looking at new business lines, figuring out where you're strong and what you can do as an organization or company that will differentiate you in the market will be everything.
Excellent. And C, what advice would you give?
I like to skip this question on my part, because I think between Andrew and Craig, they're much more relevant on the provider perspective.
That's fair enough. Thank you. Andrew, what advice would you have?
DC is very kind. He just knows I'm long-winded and needed that time, right? So, I guess very short but very sweet. One, I want to agree with what Craig said, but nobody gets on a panel to see three people agree with each other. So maybe an additional, right? Define and be unrelentingly committed to what your core is. Be good at saying yes, but be equally good at saying no. And I'll give you an example. I met with the board of directors the other day about an organization contemplating coming into chapters, right? They had said, we want to remain independent. We want to do this. We want to realize all these things. And I said to them, then you don't want to have this conversation with me, right? If that's what you want, then you need to really be focusing your time on how do you achieve that. So many people are setting business plans in motion or setting aspirations out there just for the notion of being an inch deep and a mile wide. We have a little of this, a little of that. We kind of get into this and we sort of dabble with that. We're a continuum. No, you're not. It's okay to be singular at something, or it's okay to be huge or small or only east or only west. But know that's what you want to be, right? To stay afloat is a very different term than saying I want to be the biggest, or I want to be the most broad-based, or I want to have the most revenue. Those are different ambitions. What is your ambition? And be unrelenting and absolutely committed to it. That'd be my result on how you stay afloat, whether it's hospice provision or any other pursuit that you have.
And I would just add that it's really key that your organization be a relational organization. And what do I mean by that? I frequently see executive directors or CEOs sitting in their office and they're not involved in the community. Their senior teams are not involved in the community. My first year here 10 years ago, I think I did almost 100 education sessions in a year at skilled nursing facilities, hospital systems, Rotary clubs, you name it. It's very important to build relationships in the community. And it's never ending. Sometimes it's exhausting, but being a relationship organization is key.
Thank you. And we are coming up on the hour, so I'm going to skip ahead and try to squeeze in one more question if we can, and just to make sure we're casting as wide a net as possible. And it's, what other issues or concerns do you see coming to the forefront in 2024 that maybe we haven't yet discussed? Steve, would you start?
Yes, and I think the most inspiring conversation we've had at Home Care 100 earlier this week, I know Andrew was there as well, are actually indeed reflecting some of the core theme from perhaps the very first question. I don't think it belongs to topics that we haven't talked about, but rather belongs to a topic I think we all have to think about very hard, which is how to compete and evolve on quality and have that highly effective payer or even network strategies. And don't get stuck in the past of let's turn the crank on hospice fee-for-service model, something that we've done so for 10, 20 years. That might be increasingly more focus on optimizing the tactical for what's in the rearview mirror versus looking ahead on the horizon through that windshield.
Thank you. And Andrew, what else do you see coming to the forefront?
Yeah, and I'll speak fairly quickly to package this together as the two-part answer, but neither can coexist on its own. So trends, the concerning ones, right? The Johnny Raincloud view on the world is the increasing prevalence of the non-traditional competition, right? You have people chipping away at the boundaries of what we do, hospice-like or home-based, this or what tech-enabled that. I think that's a real issue. I think as we have to contend with it. I think one, AI or tech-enabled platforms that are not focused on the benefit preservation or the end-of-life care so much as they are just getting into the space and monetizing and creating revenue. And then I think third, this continued push to see hospice as a cost center and not as a standalone benefit or a part of a care approach. Now, that stated, those are problems. What do you do about those problems? And my answer is extremely simple, and it's always the same one. You need to invest heavily in unreplaceable people. And what I mean by that is if you're looking to buy or get bought, the best asset you can have in your M&A portfolio is your leadership and your staff. It's what they can't do on their own. Right? If you're worried about AI, unreplaceable people are still artificial or advanced intelligence proof. If you're focused on quality, you can't do it without unreplaceable people. Go on, take your list wherever you want. But I would say for all the headwinds and trends, the singular and sole focus in my mind is unreplaceable people. Invest every penny you have there.
Thank you. And Craig, would you bring us home?
Sure. Well, I'm going to agree with Andrew entirely. It really is all about people. And, there are gargantuan infrastructure shifts happening in healthcare right now. As local organizations, we need infrastructure that's as dynamic enough to handle these seismic shifts in the population. I don't think any of us is fully prepared still for the silver tsunami that's happening and for the changes that are going to unfold over the next 5 to 10 years in healthcare. Some of those we can anticipate, but we can't anticipate all of them. Dr. B.J. Miller, who was the medical director for Zen Hospice, he says, we need to tease unnecessary suffering out of our healthcare systems. Hospitals were not designed for people to live and die in. And yet that is still what happens in a lot of our communities, is patients don't access the kind of care that could further their values, what's important to them, their end-of-life goals. And so, we really need to focus on how we at the local level can tease that suffering out of the system and then build an infrastructure that makes the care, this is going to sound a little woo-woo, but it's really true, make the care more joyful, more meaningful for the patient and family, instead of just less miserable. And if we can do that, we're going to be well prepared for the future.
That's a great note to end on. Thanks very much, gentlemen, each one of you, for this excellent discussion. We really appreciate your time and your insights. Of course, I'd also like to thank our sponsor, CareXM, for making this possible today, and definitely everyone in our audience for tuning in. I hope you all take good care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care.